Hey, welcome, folks. We're here tonight for the Tenkara Angler Level Line podcast. Our fearless leader, Mike Agnetta, can't be here today. He's got work or something like that to do, so he won't be with us today. Seriously, he gets quite busy during the playoffs, so he can't make it. So as a result, things might be a little more loose than when Mike's here manning the ship. So today I've got Bill with me. How you doing, Bill?
Good to see you guys. Greetings from the driftless area of Wisconsin.
And we got Dave Rossett for the first time on the podcast.
Yeah, they let me out finally. Hi.
And, of course, Tom Davis, who most of you probably know. Hey, Tom.
Hey, everybody.
So today we're just going to kind of jump right into it. Usually we got some news and things to hit up, but this is a fairly big topic, and we don't have a lot of time. We got some time restraints, so we're just going to jump in. So the impetus for this podcast is going back to when I started Tenkara. People would talk about Tenkara techniques on forums and stuff, and when I would try to question folks, often you got really vague answers, and I never got really solid answers about what they meant by that. What exactly were they doing, and so I think for many years, that's kind of how things were. It was really hard to find anything out about them. And then over the years, you kind of dig in, you figure out what some of these Tenkara techniques are. So basically, I just wanted to create this podcast, and really it's aimed at maybe new Tenkara anglers or folks that maybe have been doing Tenkara but have, like me, are confused about what are some of these other things they could do. And a disclaimer, this is not meant to be an expert level seminar. I want to present some of these ideas, and really I want to get the take from Bill, Tom, and Dave, how they incorporate some of this stuff into their fishing, how they like to do it, and what works for them on the waters that they fish. And then, we always like to think of Tenkara Angler and the Tenkara Angler podcast as a community. So I would encourage anyone, with the idea of helping other anglers, to really fill up the comments with how you like to do these different techniques, and what's your spin on these things. So without any further ado, I guess I'll just start by introducing the techniques, and then we'll kind of go through them and talk about them. So I went through and I looked at a couple of books to help me on this. So this is the Tenkara book from Daniel Galhardo, and he breaks down these techniques into very simple language. He doesn't really use the Japanese terms, but I think that's really good for a lot of folks. You don't get bogged down in a lot of terminology, and he breaks it down really simply. So if you're looking for a simple guidebook, this is a great one to get. The other one, and they dive a little deeper into things, is this book. It's How to Full Fish with Simple Flies by Paul Gaskell and John Pearson. And the title might kind of deceive you. It mentions flies, but really there's a great section in the beginning that covers a lot of Tenkara techniques. They get into kind of the nitty gritty, and it may be a little overwhelming for some folks. But if you're interested in the Japanese terminology, where it comes from, that's a great book. And we'll put the links for that.
Dan, not to interrupt, but Daniel's book, I would recommend that book to anybody starting Tenkara. I think that's an excellent book.
Yeah, absolutely, Dave. So I kind of went through those books, and then I went through Dr. Ishigaki's book, which I don't even remember where I got this, and I don't know where you can find it now. I could dig in and see if that's available somewhere, but I dug into that a little bit too. So basically, when we're talking about Tenkara techniques, we're talking about generally more active fishing style than is common in Western angling. And I kind of broke them down into a couple of broader categories. So you've got drifting techniques, you've got pulling techniques, you've got swinging, and you've got lifting. Then you have surface-oriented techniques, and then one that's maybe a little more, I guess, rare is like stationary techniques. You don't hear talk about that much in Western angling at all. So I'll just kind of go down there. So with the drifting techniques, we got your classic dead drift, and then we have what we call pause and drift. So I kind of would like to talk. I'm curious about what you guys do. If you all start, you're hitting the stream, you're starting fishing. Do you guys go to a dead drift first? Is that your first thing that you start with? Whoever wants to go ahead can.
I'll go ahead and start. The funny thing about all of this, Anthony, is I don't consciously do anything.
Yeah,
that makes any sense.
Absolutely.
I must admit, my first couple casts, I tried a dead drift. I say the word try because I don't think I could get a really good dead drift, if I really tried that hard, because holding the rod, something's moving the rod, a little bit of wind, or my lack of arm strength, or certainly the currents in the water are moving that fly all over the place for the streams that I fish.
Yeah.
But in my mind, I'm dead drifting. So the first couple passes through any particular lie is a dead drift. And then after that, I'll start manipulating the fly. And what I do, I am not exactly sure. I just sort of move the tip of the rod and try to impart some action. I try to envision in my mind what the fish is seeing. I'm sure it's nothing like what is going on. So anyway, that's sort of how I approach it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say for me it's similar, because often in these streams in the driftless, I'm often in quite small streams, and most of the year the banks are very high, and the current is not roiled like alpine streams in the Mountain West or in Europe. So if you try to fish along the bank, casting vertically and letting it dead drift the stream, you're not going to catch any trout. They all see you. The only way I can catch trout in this situation, I have to get down in the water and come right up behind their six. And the problem with dead drifting then, as soon as my fly hits the water, the weight of my level line or my braided line, whatever, it pulls it downstream at an unnatural speed faster than the current. Like I don't really start to get a dead drift until my level line and my float line relaxes a bit, and then the current can kind of catch up to the speed of the fly. So, yeah, I think I'm like Tom. Optimally, I aim for as dead as a drift as I can, but in my fishing conditions, I don't think I often achieve it. I noticed when I was in Austria this summer fishing with the Austrian guys and the amazing guy Bernhard Niemeyer, and he has this blend of like Tenkara with traditional fly fishing, where he fishes a very long rod, a very long line, and he lets his line lie on the water. And I think maybe what he's doing, he's aiming for a bit more of a dead drift than if you keep the line off the water. Anyway, that's what I got.
It's interesting you mentioned that, Bill, because I remember years ago there was a video of Yuzo Sabata, and it was kind of interesting because there was all this talk online of keeping your line off the water and so on and so forth. And the first cast, and he was fishing a long braided nylon line that he made, and his line was on the water.
On the water, yeah.
Yeah, remember that, Tom? I can't remember the name of the video, Old Man of the Mountains or Old Man.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly what it was.
And I've often wondered if that's what he was trying to achieve as more of a dead drift, because you're right, when you first make that cast out, if there's any kind of a breeze, you've got to try and, your line's going to get blown around a little bit. It might take you a while to compensate for that to get a dead drift.
He was using a lot longer line than I use. I don't obviously from that video, they don't say what length of line, but you could just tell it's a lot. It's a long line.
Yeah. I think
he's longer than I ever use.
I think he was using a line almost 1.5 to twice as long as the rod he was fishing, if I remember.
Yeah, I'd say so,
Yeah. It's interesting that you guys bring that up. So, I've gone out with some like competition anglers a couple times, and the one thing that and the one time I was out with a guy, he emphasized the lift. So he would cast out, if he was going for a dead drift, cast out and let the line lay on the water so that it's sinking naturally as it approaches him, only lift as it approaches him. So that kind of what you guys are talking about. You can let your line lay on the water, and counterintuitively kind of get a better drift than if you lift it up immediately and you just start dragging it. If you lift it up, you're going to get a drift, but it's going to be further down the line. You know, so
notice just one more thing. Just notice, thinking through it, and you guys might have a different, or I think when I fish with Rob Worthing and watch him, he's one who really consistently, he's got this little bit of a lift at the end of his cast. Just before his fly hits the water, he's got this little bit of lift. And I think part of what he's doing, he's anticipating the weight of his level line or furled line. He's usually level line. If I just cast straight out to the full extent of my line, but keeping it off the water, as soon as that fly hits the water, my line is dragging it downstream fast in the current. And I think with that little lift, you build in a little bit of like slack or cushion, so that isn't quite so dramatic. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Bill, that lift comes from Oni.
Yes.
So
yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Rob and many others are students of Oni, and if you watch Oni right before the end, he'll do sort of a little J. And that tightens the line up so that the fly enters the water, keeps the line off. But of course, he goes directly into manipulating. I'm not sure I can say, I've been to the Oni school 5 times now for all or part of it. And so I've had a fair experience with him. And I don't think that I can recall him really doing a lot of Western dead drift.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he almost always imparts some manipulation in. He may dead drift a little bit of a drift, but then he'll, manipulate the fly as it continues just before he casts. So anyway, but that's where that comes from. And Rob, of course, does a fantastic job of casting. So
I think if you're coming from the Western tradition, and you're thinking about the dead drift, and a lot of the Euro anglers, do the same kind. They know this too, right? With that light line, we're obviously in a long rod, we're able to get some pretty nice drifts. And when we're talking about a dead drift, just for folks that don't know, I think it's a little bit of a misnomer. You want the fly to look alive, but in a natural way. You want it to be drifting, but in a natural drift. And that's what, it allows you to do when you have your line off of the water. And I could see, Bill's giving me a thumbs up. I don't know what that's.
No, this is AI garbage. I've been noticing. I'm getting bubbles. I'm not farting or anything here on the podcast. This is out of my control. And they don't smell that good anyway. They'd be thumbs down, the bubbles. I think.
I thought it was the universal sign for hitchhiking. So
this has nothing. This is out of my control. I don't know why that's coming up. I must be thinking good thoughts.
All right.
A thought just occurred to me as I was listening to Bill and Tom, and I was thinking of my own fishing. I seem to be more concerned about a dead drift when I'm fishing weighted flies, nymphing or, casting. And I rarely ever cast straight upstream. Most of the streams that I'm fishing, I'm usually off to the side, and so I'm kind of angling up. I'm more concerned about, maybe high stick if I'm fishing a tight line and weighted flies and getting that to drift down through the run. But when I'm fishing weightless kabari, I'll cast it out and just try and keep my line off the water and kind of let it do its thing as it goes down through either the, just through the surface film or down further in the water column. I don't know if that makes sense or not.
Yeah.
We got a lot more techniques to go through, but one thing I often think when I'm out fishing, I do know. I have a really good friend. He goes out every year to West Yellowstone, and he said the fishing out west, like in the Madison, he's a traditional fly fisher. It's very technical. You've got to get a perfect presentation because it's so heavily fished, and these little dry flies. But when I look at the current in the driftless stream, which they aren't hammered a lot, those currents and those winds and everything, they're throwing insect life in all sorts of directions. And it's just, I'm skeptical that a trout is going to look at something that's not precisely dead drift and saying, oh, that's fake. I'm not going to go after that.
Yeah.
Because all day they're looking at food that's getting swirled in all sorts of directions, from microcurrents, side currents, wind-blown stuff. So I've often, sometimes when I'm out there, I'm musing, how important is dead drift for where I fish and how I fish? It may be overrated as a necessity. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I was kind of like a nymph fisherman, and dead drift was what you did. And I mean, I still do it a lot when I'm nymphing. I mean,
yeah, I agree, nymph, because there the current is much more consistent.
Yes.
If you're down on the bottom, then it's just this conveyor belt of food coming, and they know. I agree. I'm talking, more like within a foot of the surface and all the swirling and currents. Yeah. I think with nymphing, I would agree. So.
Yeah. So I bring up the dead drift just as a kind of a base. It's what you hear about all the time. In Western angling, it's very emphasized. And I was just kind of curious what you guys thought about it. I mean, I do it a lot, but in combination with things. But it is, probably my go-to first cast, in the run to see if that brings anything up. The other one that I have included in the drift is the pause and drift. Tome okori. And so this would be mostly a downstream fishing technique where you let your fly drift and you might stop it. And then you let it drift again and you stop it. And I have to admit, I mean, I've read about that for years, and it's not something that I do a ton, I don't think, specifically. And I was curious if, Tom, I know you've been doing it before. Have you used that a lot? Or
I don't do it consciously. I mean, if I'm casting up in a quarter and it comes down, when it starts to go down below me, I might. To me, I'm moving the hackle. That's what I'm thinking in my mind. Less about actually keeping the fly in any one position. So consciously, I probably don't do it consciously, but maybe subconsciously.
Yeah, I have to say, I read, I talked to Goishi once, and he mentioned, I actually wrote an article for my old website, and he talked about this angler that would let the fly sit for a long time.
Yeah.
When he did that, and I've tried that and caught fish like that, but I don't have the patience to do that much. But I think, like you say, like the pause and drift is maybe I do it in pocket water situations where I might pause it in front of a pocket, a rock that I think is helpful. And I also think of it more as if I'm fishing something that's deeper, my pause will make the fly rise rather than just a pure pause kind of thing.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know if Bill or Dave, you had anything to talk about with that technique.
Yeah, I'm like with Tom. It's like, okay, it's just, you're always going for what will work in this situation. And you do have like a little quiver of techniques like J-cast and you've learned, and I don't fish downstream that often, so I don't have much call for it.
Yeah, and that's just to add to what you said, Bill. And that's kind of the whole point, I hope, of this podcast, is to list all these things and then not have people say, hey, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, but as a continuum. It's sort of like this bag of tricks that you use.
Mm-hmm. Right.
How about you, Dave? Do you ever do the pause?
I don't constantly at the end. I don't want to jump ahead to the lifting. We'll talk about that because it's further down the list, but I don't subconsciously pause my fly. In all honesty, after my fly comes down through the area I'm fishing, I'm thinking in my mind, okay, do I believe that there's a fish there and I want to make a couple more casts down through that run? Or it's a lot of times I'm looking up at my next spot. I'm not too worried about pausing my fly once I get through the area I'm fishing.
Right.
The only time I might do that is if there's a lot of surface activity or something and fish are, if they're taking emergers or something, then I might do that at the end, pause it and let it come up a little bit and see if I can luck out and catch a trout that way. But I don't consciously do it.
Yeah. So I think it's a good thing to be aware of, though, and I think I think I do it in little sections, and yeah, it's just another tool to add to your toolbox. And I think like you kind of touched on it, Dave, but and it might come up later when I'm swinging wet flies. I do some pausing in that on purpose, kind of. But we can kind of talk about that later.
What I think, and we'll move, not to belabor this, but I think it's good to know about that technique, because if nothing is working, I mean, it's fishing, right? I mean, and these fish aren't too terribly smart, but sometimes you can sit there and scratch your head. And if something's not working and you just have that in your quiver, as Bill mentioned, that might be a technique to try, and that might be the difference of keep scratching your head or catching, a couple fish or something.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I hope, that we add all these things to your little bag of tricks. The next kind of major category is pulling presentations. And this is one that, I mean, I use a ton. Like, this is like a major part of the way I fish. And, I could talk about this the whole time. So I'll just kind of start just because it's like on my mind. So the different pulling techniques, you've got to imagine that you're drifting the fly downstream. So you've got cross stream and you've got up and downstream, right? So you've got pulling techniques where you pull it across the current, like a side pull, which in Japanese is yokobiki. And then you've got like an upstream pull, which would be gyakubiki. And I'm sure I'm not saying that exactly right, but and I don't use the Japanese terms, but I just throw them out there in case you've heard these terms and kind of wondered what they are. So I just want to say, with the side pull technique, or pulling your fly across the current, not a full like downstream wet fly swing, but this is more of a sudden pull. And in the Ishigaki book, he talks about moving it pretty significantly, like 20 centimeters. These aren't just little pulses. He's moving it a lot. And I'll tell you the one, not to take up all the time, but the one time I use this technique, I use it out in the driftless all the time. And if you're fishing, say you're fishing a small driftless stream, like a tiny one, maybe it's 3 feet wide. You might be tempted to think, if you drift your fly down the center of that fish are going to come out, and you think you kind of got it covered. Maybe hit closer to the shore, and but they'll tuck up under the grass and under those banks, and they'll really sit tight. And I found if I let the fly drift right along the blank and then pull it sideways, often you can lure fish out of those undercuts like that. It's kind of amazing. So I actually use that a lot, that side pull technique, upstream of me, not downstream. I use it upstream, which is the nice thing about Tenkara gear, is you can do this upstream with Western gear. That would be really hard. It'd be kind of a mess, but so I use that a ton. And in little, what I'll call micro lies, like maybe it's an area this big, and I think a fish might be sitting there. I'll do a little side pull right in front of it, that kind of thing. So I do that a ton. So, I find
Anthony, are you saying, so, upstream and you're casting right along the bank where there might be tuck, but then you're pulling it back out to the center of the stream, and that stimulates...
Yeah, letting it go underneath the bank and then pulling it out.
Yeah, you can do that too, Dave. But even if you can't get it under there, that sudden motion too. Yeah, if you can get it, you manage to get it in there. Yeah, that's good too. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But yeah, I think it's a great technique. So I'll let you other guys, go ahead and talk about.
That's why you catch more fish than I do.
That's exactly right. That's why that day you and I fished together a couple of years ago, you waxed me. You caught like 50 fish and I caught 2 or something.
It's a great. I found in the driftless, it's a great technique. So
I've only used it. When I use it, it's bit of an upstream pull. It's like that thing that I went to the Oni school and I've been to the driftless Oni with Rob, and basically, especially when I'm able to fish perpendicular to a run, there's like 4 or 5 different presentations, and you see Oni do this. He gives 5 recipes to that run, and one of them is, and it has worked for me. It's weird. It just pulling it upstream through a little bit of a run, it has stimulated trout to strike that I didn't think were there. based on
the
previous presentations.
Go ahead.
One of the things I want to sort of bring up at this point is we're talking about these various ways of manipulating the fly, which, of course, as Anthony's alluded to in for many decades in Western tradition, you don't manipulate the fly unless it's a streamer.
Yes.
But now we read more and more about even competition fishermen manipulating their flies to some degree to induce a take, whether it's a lysing ring lift or whether it's one of these other techniques, because it works. But to do it effectively, you have to have a rod that has a low degree of inertia. And so, as we look at our gear, our lines, if you're using a traditional level line, and even to some degree a furrowed line, are much lighter than PVC lines, and so we're able to manipulate and move the fly with a better degree of tactile finesse, if you will. That also goes for the rod. I mean, there's all different types of rods out there, and most of them are great, and you can catch fish with them and have a lot of fun. But there are certain rods that just lend themselves to allow you to move your arm and translate that movement all the way down the line to the fly. It's almost like magic. If the rod has a really heavy a really high rotational moment, so a tip heaviness, it's going to be hard to move that rod in a finesse way. Don't you agree?
Yeah.
And impart that to the fly. Whereas if you have a rod, let's for instance just say an Oni rod, their rotational moments are so low that moving your arm, they become like part of your arm, and you can manipulate the fly. So there's a lot. I think there's a lot of people out there who are fishing all different types of situations and may not have that understanding because they're using a certain rod, and that rod is effective, but it's quite heavy and clunky, if I may say, and they're not going to get the same result. I think this is one of the important things of like the driftless conclave, or how we get together and there's a lot of people there, they're fishing different rods, and you're able to touch a different rod and say, oh, okay, this is what they're talking about, because I can get the fly to manipulate with this rod, but I can't as well with this other rod. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think that's a good point, because I was sitting here thinking back in the old days when I used to do a lot of rod and reel fly fishing and doing wet fly swings. I kind of started out dry flies up, wet flies back down. And even swinging wet flies, I always felt like there was a disconnect there, because you have a PVC line, and you've got a nylon tapered leader, what have you, but I never felt disconnected, or I never felt really connected to what my fly you could manipulate. And you might be able to take your rod tip and maybe, move them a little bit and then do the lysing ring lift at the end. But with Tenkara, you have that connection. And you're right. Some rods, I think, are better at that than others.
Without question.
Without question.
To speak to that, Tom, I haven't fished nearly as many rods as you, but you know it when you fish it, right?
That's exactly what it is. Yep.
Certain rods I fish and I can't hook a fish, and I'm like, I'm not using that rod anymore. And I couldn't tell you exactly what was going on, but I know it didn't work for me.
It was.
Yeah.
I was.
You going to say something, Bill?
Well, I went to New York to visit my daughter earlier this month and had coffee with Chris Stewart, and my Tenkara Bum 360, that's one of those rods for me.
Absolutely.
It's like an extension of my arm. And this is what I noticed, as Anthony said, my hook set is just much more effective with that rod. And I don't really know why. Anyway, that's one of those rods for me.
It's a fast hook rod.
Yeah.
It's got a very, very low rotational moment. And if you're using a level line or a light furrowed line, there is no mass between your hand. There's very little mass between your hand and the fly.
Yeah, exactly. That's
so there's
my
nothing to suck up that energy.
yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I never think about these things as much as related to the rods as you do, Tom. I think I'm not as gear oriented. I mean, not to say that you're gear oriented. I don't want to like label you, but I don't think about rods as much. I do think like the irony though is that as a beginner, a better rod would probably benefit you more than as an experienced angler or anything, because you
agree. Yeah, for sure.
You learn to adjust, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
but
the problem is the better rods typically are more conducive to breakage.
Yes.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
They're just a little more delicate, and so beginners and nice rods tend to sometimes not work out so well.
And when you do break them, it's painful. It's painful to the pocket.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I actually want to do a podcast about breaking rods.
Oh, good Lord.
So we can all. I think that would be helpful. I'm thinking of these things like this podcast and the rod breaking one. After the holidays and people might have got gear, they got a new Tenkara rod, and season's coming up. What's helpful to them. That's kind of got me thinking. But like, I've broken rods in a lot of different ways, so I'm sure we all have.
Call it the dumbest ways I've broken rods or something to that.
Yeah. So
Sounds like an article for the magazine, Dave.
Huh?
Yeah.
Sounds like an article for the magazine, Dave.
Yeah. So along with the pooling, we've got an upstream pool, and this is the Gyakubiki, and I'm going to throw in, there's another term for like you pull it upstream and you let it go back down, you pull it upstream and you gradually move it upstream in this sort of back and forth thing. And I'm going to say the upstream pool, when I fish with my dad, he doesn't really do Tenkara stuff, but he'll put on like a woolly bugger and he'll find a log jam or a deep undercut. And he'll do this for a half an hour or whatever it takes. He'll drift it, he'll pull it back up, he'll drop it back, he'll pull it up, and he'll do that. And I may catch 100 fish to his one fish, but he'll catch the big one.
Yeah, exactly. Until that fish shoots out and grabs that fly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So this technique, I think, is like, I've had great luck with this one as well with the upstream pool. And again, it was in the driftless where I kind of started doing it a lot. I was there on a day where it had rained, the water was up, not too much, but it was cloudy and stuff, and I couldn't catch anything. And I just started ripping flies across stream and upstream and started catching fish. So I kind of got faith in that after that. But the upstream pool is something I do a lot. I kind of incorporate it into almost every drift. You guys may be the same. It's always the fly swings around, and I'm going to do the upstream pool focused on certain areas. And that's the other thing I'd add, and I'm sure you guys would agree, is that these techniques, you don't want to go about it robotically. You want to go about it in a focused manner, focusing on where you think trout are likely to be. And, of course, you'll catch fish however you do it. But the more you know about where fish might be, and then you focus these techniques on those spots, the more luck you'll have. So, I don't want people to think about, so it's just another kind of a layer as you develop these skills, how you decide to focus them. But the upstream pool I think is great. I don't know if you guys use that much.
I don't fish downstream very often, so I don't say I do it much. But maybe against a log jam, that's a really good time to use it. Something like that, or the hydraulic cushion above the rocks or the logs. But I just don't fish downstream very often. So
I do. I do it in the heads of pools a lot. Where you got the slick tongue of current, you got those little sides, or in pocket water, I'll fish downstream through pocket water like that, kind of pulling it up. But it can be pretty effective. And again with all these, I would like to add. I remember I was at like a local fly fishing event, and I was talking to this guy. He was like a wet fly fisherman, and I was talking about how I loved fishing them, and even though that's what he was there doing, he's like, yeah, but you only catch the small ones or something like that. And like, I just have to disagree wholeheartedly with that, because a lot of people will say these aren't natural. Some of these things aren't natural fly movements, and that only those little eager fish are going to chase them. But, and of course, you will catch those fish. But I've caught plenty of nice fish doing all these things. So don't let that common, it's kind of like a common thing you hear pretty often that these active techniques aren't good for the bigger fish. But not that you're necessarily after those fish, but you can catch them too.
And I think too, there's one stream that I fish that I'll fish it upstream, but I'm in the water 90% of the time in that stream because of it's just tree lined and you can't really be on the bank until you get up so far. And so I'll fish it upstream and I'll just, rest the area that I've come propping up through for, 15 minutes. I might just rest or something, take a break. And then I'll swing flies on the way back down in most of the areas that I fished upstream. And I found by that upstream pull, sometimes I'll catch bigger fish and thought, okay, why wasn't that fish there? Why didn't I catch you on my way up? And I'll find the strikes maybe just a little bit more aggressive when you do that. Swing that fly down and then, just pull it back upstream a little bit. I don't know if that's what you found, Anthony, or not.
Yeah. I mean, and to add to that is, obviously hooking can be a little more difficult when you're doing these upstream things.
They grab it. I mean, when they really take it, I think. I don't know.
Yeah, but you get some explosive takes though. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and then I would add, when you're doing any of these techniques, keep in mind the angle of the line and the rod. When I'm doing this like upstream pool, I've got my rod and line at like an angle. I'm not facing downstream and doing it. You want that to keep that spring in your rod. So you always want to have that angle.
Yeah.
So that kind of covers, that gives some people some ideas about what they could do with those different techniques, with the pulling techniques. So I've got swinging listed here next, but I'm going to jump ahead a little bit and talk about, because we don't have, what time is it? We're getting a little short on time. So I did want to talk about Tomezuri, which is literally translated as like stop fishing. And I think different Tenkara anglers may think of this in different ways. When I was looking at I think it was in the Gaskell and Pearson book, they kind of summed it up as any techniques that you use to stop the fly in the stream, which I kind of thought was, so it's not one specific technique, but it's more of a concept, I guess. So this is one that for me, I kind of, when you look at a lot of these things that we're talking about, they're not completely unknown to Western anglers. Like we talked about the wet fly fishing and things like that. And this one, isn't either, but I feel of a lot of these techniques, it's kind of very Tenkara centric. You don't hear people talking about this a lot in Western angling. It's something that you do on purpose. It's kind of like mentioned briefly. You're fishing pocket water, you might try to get your fly to sit there. But anyway, it's one that I thought was fairly unique. So the way I do it a lot, and this will probably get me in trouble, but I like to use a dry dropper when I do this.
Oh my gosh. Oh, boots. Yeah. What kind of podcast is it? What are we doing? What show am I on? Bass Mountain?
Because, and this is, so I'll do it a dry dropper with a nymph. And the thing is, like, and a lot of the streams I fish aren't that big, but especially in the spring, I can't get across the stream, usually, in some of them. And so you've got that soft water on the other side of that tongue of current.
That's the best place, place.
For those Western anglers, that's a hard spot to fish. And I think it gets overlooked and it doesn't get fished well. So as Tenkara anglers with the long rod and the light line, if you can cast your fly over there, and the reason I like a dry dropper is it anchors really nicely, and you can make it sit right over in that soft water. And man, I've caught a lot of fish that way. So not that you can't Yeah.
Can I suggest, just for, people who may be less familiar with this, can you just start from the beginning and describe this technique and what it looks like and how to do it? Can
Like
you?
what I'm talking about?
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
So with
You
the
draw
dry
the
dropper,
Japanese. No. What's the technique?
Yeah. So it just means to stop your fly, in the stream at some point. And there's different ways that you can do it. And generally it's gonna be in spots where you've got like eddies, and it could be big eddies or it could be small ones in pocket water.
Anywhere there's foam.
Yeah.
So you're
froggy
stopping
water
it.
there. Anywhere
You're
there's
stopping it.
foam, that
Yeah.
fly will stay if you manipulate it right.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's you are taking some active manipulation to keep this fly stationary in the water.
You could.
Yeah.
You could. You might.
Situation.
Or you're casting to places that are stationary in the water.
Right.
That's more what it is.
That's generally how I do it. But if you so the dry dropper is my evil Western way that I like to do it. One way, if you want to stick to more traditional Tenkara style methods, and I don't use them a lot, but stiff hackled kabari are something that people use for this because they tend to anchor better in the current.
Acts like a drogue.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So do you fish the stiff hackled kabari, Tom? Is that something?
I do quite a bit. Yeah, quite a bit. Yeah.
You want to talk about that a little? Because I don't use them that much. So
yeah, I haven't fished. In fact, I can't remember the last time I did a dry dropper, but essentially I know what you're saying. I'll use a futsu or a stiff hackle kabari. Typically, it'll have a little weight to it. I use a lot of brass beads because they add a little bling, but they don't add too much weight like the tungsten bead does, because I like to be able to manipulate the fly. And I'll look across current, just like you mentioned. The best spots are always where you can't get to.
yeah.
But anyway, oftentimes you can drop your fly in there, and I'll put the fly in there, and then I'll just carefully sort of watch the line. Of course, I'm watching my sighter anyway, and wherever the sighter is moving, I'll counter it just with the tip of the rod, just a little bit. And it oftentimes will just keep that fly. And sometimes, not often, but sometimes it'll just stay there and stay there and stay there until nothing happens and I get bored and time to move on. And I'm always amazed at how well it's tethered. The line is straight, and I think, wow, that's beautiful. I'm good. But they don't catch a fish. But yeah, if you've done it, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't done it, then I would say, if your situation allows it, then do it. Certainly on my streams, a little higher gradient, freestone, to the slow eddies next to the edge of the stream, really are conducive to that technique. And I would say probably 50% of the time, you drop that fly in there, you're sitting there. Most of the time, most of the fish that I hook, I think I hook within the first few seconds of a drift. As soon as that fly is in the water, somehow that they see it and they go after it. But this technique, I'll drop that fly in there, and like I said, I can sit there for 10, 15, 20 seconds, and the fly is just sort of hovering, if that makes any sense, in the water, and then boom!
Yes.
It's like, I don't know if the fish is, sort of patrolling an area, or it was sitting there watching it, thinking, I don't know. Boom! But the takes can be quite strong, and I will throw out this word. The takes are very satisfying. You know what I'm talking about. It's fun to hook fish, right?
Oh, yeah.
The tug is the drug. But oh boy, I just get tingly all over. It's so satisfying when and then you're able to pull the fish out in the current and lose it. So anyway, yeah.
Nice. So what about you, Dave? Is this something you do on purpose, or you?
I I agree that, Tenkara has opened up a lot of water that you couldn't fish before with a Western fly rod. I don't do it as often, but I have done it. And if I am doing it, I was sitting here about the stiff hackle fly. I think I've fished a futsu probably 90% of the time last year. I just got on this one particular fly. It was a pattern that I got from Dre Fornasario. I butchered his last name, and he'll probably whoop me next time I see him. But that fly for me in our driftless streams in Iowa worked, and what I liked about it is, where there's foam and you've got that little eddy area, you can cast over there, and I can hold that fly. And to me, that fly, it may not be undulating as much as maybe a Sakasa Kabari, but I think I can maybe hold it a little bit better. I don't know if that makes sense or not.
I think they give the angler a lot more feedback.
Yeah.
Than a Sakasa or a June. You can feel the fly pull back against.
Yeah, I was going to say that, Tom. When I have fished them, it's shocking how you feel the fly. It'll get, especially if you do have a little weight, it'll get kind of deep, and you'll feel it pull in different directions.
Yeah. And sometimes you even think it's a take.
Yeah.
So you set the hook, but then you realize there's a current down there that's pulling the fly down, and you do it again, and you can feel it again.
And I think the feedback, whether the fly has got, and I do the same thing. If I put a weight, it's a little tiny brass bead. I don't put tungsten beads on any of them, but I think you can feel the fly, whether it's got a little brass bead on there or you tie them without them. There's just something about a futsu that gives you that feedback, at least to me, more than a Sakasa does.
Yeah. I know, Bill, you got to be cutting out of here soon, so I just wondered if you had anything to add on this topic.
No, I do it, and I'm been inspired listening to Tom and you guys to pay more attention to it and do it more specifically.
Yeah. All right. So that's kind of an introduction to that technique. Pocket water is a great place that you can do this. You got so many places. I like to do it on the spring creeks that I fish. The trout lay on the bank a lot, so it's something you can do on the bank. Let's see, what else do we got here? We could talk about
Pon Pon.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. So me and Jonathan did a couple podcasts about this, and it's the thing that I did last year a lot. If you want to, you brought it up, Tom. So you want to introduce the idea?
Well, I mentioned earlier that most of these techniques, I don't think that I do them consciously. Most of them I do them subconsciously. They're just sort of intuitive. However, this technique I do consciously. Actually have to think about it and rig properly. I have to rig properly. So I don't get the opportunity to do it very often. But in the spring, coming up here in March, there's a tailwater that I like to go up to and fish in central Idaho, and the fish are surface focused on blue-wing olives, and I find that if I will do a dropper point fly, the dropper off of a small, 3-4 inches, not too long of a dropper, the point fly being a futsu, usually a futsu without any weight, but acting as a drogue to pull, and then I try to fish downstream. And this is the only time I really fish downstream regularly. So the line is going down to the surface. It penetrates through the water, and you have your point fly on the end that's got some resistance. And I try to keep that little dropper fly, which is either I usually use a small soft tackle. In fact, one of Jonathan's, I think he calls it the Lose Blue or something like that. Little dropper, soft tackle, and keep that on the surface, and then tap with your finger. Since we typically will hold the rod this way, I don't know if you're holding it traditionally, if you can do it this way, but typically we do this tripod grip or finger forward grip on a Tenkara rod and tapping the blank, and it causes that that dropper fly, it causes the futsu to sort of undulate back and forth under the water, but it causes the dropper to sort of bounce on the surface. Am I explaining that right, Anthony? It bounces and dances and flitters, and and you got to be, you have to judge your situation. If there's a breeze, then you might have to tap harder or less, or it's really an interesting technique. And the fish come up and take that fly right off the surface as it's dancing around. And if you're not as bad, they pop you off.
Yeah.
And I mean, but it's a marvelous technique, and it's the first time you hook a fish with it, you just can't believe it. You think there's no way that just happened.
Yeah,
but it happened over and over and over again. It's amazing.
I did it. It's something that is not unheard of in Western angling. When I first started in the 90s, it was something people talked about with caddis hatches. You would put a caddis on the dropper and a nymph, and you would bounce it on the surface, generally downstream. But with
glittering caddis, exactly.
And with Tenkara gear, it elevates the game. It makes it just easier to do. But yeah, I did it a ton. I did it kind of the opposite of the way you do it. I would put the dropper would have a little weight, and the point fly would have a little weight, and then the dropper would be my unweighted fly.
Well, that's sort of what I was. That's how I do it too, except I typically don't use much weight. So
yeah, and so I would use like dry flies and a emerger or something like that, and pop them up and down. And I don't like to do it. Bothers my finger. It's like a trigger finger thing. So I just bounce it. I kind of bounce the tip, because this just irritates my finger. But you can
the older I get, the older we get, we might all get a tremor.
Well, you don't have to consciously do it. Your hands are just.
But yeah,
at least we're going to get better at something as we get older.
I swear that fish. Yeah, I swear that fish hit the fly when it was out of the water. Like I had fish, jump or leaping out of the water, and just explosive. I mean, you'll be grinning. It's super fun. I mean, you're not gonna hook them all. But it's a blast.
It's another form of an induced take.
Yes. Yeah.
And I agree. It'll hit the water, and then as it rises, that's when the fish comes up and nails it. And it's an amazing experience. I've not done it with a CDC fly, but I could see how that would be very effective.
Yeah. So I have a theory about it, and I wonder if you've thought about this, Tom. This is my theory, and I haven't read anyone else mention this. Imagine, a fly going out of the water, or if they're laying eggs coming into the water.
Yeah.
And it's going to be a flash of light.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
When you're bouncing that fly, right, you're making all these flashes. So any fish, near there sees this. And I have to imagine that when there's a lot of bug activity, that those flashes of light are triggers to the fish. I have no proof of that, but
I've not thought of that, but that makes sense. Absolutely.
It's one of my theories anyway.
Yeah. I'm certainly, no matter what it is, whether it's flash of light or whatever, you're breaking that underwater mirror.
Yeah, right.
When they look up, they see the stream around them and all through a mirror.
Right.
And you're sort of telegraphing right here. Here's a bug.
Yeah. And that's why I think Western, you alluded to it, Anthony, skating a caddis, an elk hair caddis across the surface. That's something I used to do all the time. And I think that was kind of an alert to them. Of course, caddis, when they hatch, they make that movement. But I think that skating and that Pon Pon and everything else, as you met, it's breaking that mirror and it gets their attention, and they have to decide, do I eat that or not? So
I had that as a surface-oriented technique was the Pon Pon, and then skating, and both of those I did a lot last year on supposedly fairly technical water with picky fish, storing hatches when there were no hatches, and was so pleasantly surprised that it worked.
Were you using a long level line and a green line then when you do that technique, or are you using a standard orange line or pink?
I mostly use an orange line just because that's what I have, and I mean, sometimes I think I'll take different lines and I'll change them out when I'm fishing, but that never happens. So I can see the orange line, and I figure I can see it, and if I can't see the line, I'm not going to fish as well. So maybe under like my theory about line color is like under the conditions where line color might matter, I feel like the shadow of your line matters even more.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I agree.
Yeah.
And I started last year on that particular water using a number 2, like you had mentioned, Anthony, in some of your communications. Because it's downstream, and I don't want much belly.
Right.
You don't want much drape. And so using a number 2 line, I can still see the line, particularly if I put black, use a little marker that causes some contrast. Anyway, I don't use the invisible lines, the green lines, because I can't, the light green line, I can't see them.
Yeah, I don't fish anything I can't see.
Yeah, I'm not going to say it doesn't have an advantage in certain times, but the disadvantage of not being able to see it, I guess, just is enough for me not to do it.
And where Jonathan fishes a lot on the South Platte, and I fished that years ago. Back when I had hair and I could see my belt buckle without looking in a mirror. I can understand why he uses a stealth line on that
back
wall.
when fish just evolved.
Yeah, I can see that. But you, Bill, have you done this at all? Is that a new thing to you, or
it's completely new to me. And but talking about lines, and I don't know if it was effective or not. When I was first starting at Tenkara, and my technique wasn't great several years ago, and often my line would be in the water, I intentionally went with green lines because I'm fishing in places where there's just grass all over the banks. I thought, okay, if a bit of green line, something long and green hits the water, I figured it was less likely to spook the trout because it looked like part of the environment versus something orange or pink hitting the water. I don't know if it helped or not. Now that my technique's getting better, I've gone back to orange lines. I just ordered a pink line, just came in the mail. But I intentionally used the green lines that look most like a blade of grass. I don't know if it did me any good, but that was my thinking at the time.
Like that.
Sort of camouflage, that stealth thing. I thought, okay, you were always aiming for stealth. I thought, okay, a green line is going to be stealthier than pink or orange. So,
but then you have the little gnome luang, tanuki that's out there head to toe in this color. And and he catches. I watched him pick up, 15 trout. He was right down on the bank fishing. So, but he didn't never spooked him. He never spooked him, and he was stealthy, even in his bright orange get up. So,
can I ask your guy? May I ask for advice on a technique from you experts? Something I've been trying to figure out.
Exactly.
It's fishing these driftless streams, and I'm working up, and I'm coming to the base of the pool, and I call it the Gatekeeper. There's invariably one trout waiting at the mouth of the drain, and it is so hard to get a cast to that trout. And I'm still trying to figure out how to do it because, as you know, the water is then very shallow there. But according to Snell's window, the shallower he is, the more constricted his view.
Exactly. You can get closer. You can get closer to him.
But I think the thing is the cast. I think he sees the line coming over his head or the tip of my rod. How to get a cast to this Gatekeeper at the bottom, the shallow end of a pool, I haven't figured it out yet, at least consistently. I don't know if you have any technique ideas about how to fool the Gatekeeper.
Well, the one, and it may not be exactly.
I get on my knees, everything, and I'm sneaking up.
Yeah.
And I just, and boom, you see the ripple.
Right.
It's submarine launching up into the pool for safety.
So the one thing on like the mountain streams and like summer or fall that I'll fish that get totally placid, and when I get to that tail end, I try a couple casts behind where I think any fish is.
Yeah,
depends on the speed of the current, but those casts behind there, the fish will swing, or those brook trout will sometimes turn around and take.
Okay.
That's one thing you can try.
Particularly browns. As soon as that wave hits their lateral line, and they feel it, oftentimes they'll turn and shoot downstream.
Okay. So maybe I'm aiming to try to drop the fly in front of them. Maybe try dropping it like just behind where I guess they are. Okay.
Yeah, just behind.
Just inch up. I can just inch up every 6 inches till somebody responds.
Or maybe even sometimes what I'll do is I'll try and cast maybe not so much right in front of the fish, but off to the side a little bit because their vision, I don't know exactly, but it goes out a little bit. And I think that lateral line, and they sense something is happening. Now, I don't fish a long line either. I experimented with that, but I took the page out of Tom's playbook, and my line and my tippet is usually the same length of my rod, maybe a foot longer than the rod. And so that's, I think, where stealth comes in. But I try to fish off to the side a little bit.
Here's something. You're going to go, Bill. I was going to say, here's something else you could try. When you do finally get to a fish like that, and if you really want to catch it, try shortening your line, the line itself. Make sure it's a fairly light line, like a 2.5 or a 3, but shorten the line and lengthen the tippet.
Yeah. And I think that's what's happening. I think I'm trying to get it ahead of them, and I think they're seeing the line up through.
Use a shorter rod if you've got a rod with you, to try to keep that rod tip out of their window.
Yeah, this is all sort of counterintuitive,
Yeah.
Shorten everything. I keep trying to lengthen everything to get to them.
Lengthen the tippet, but shorten everything else to keep it out of the window.
Because it feels, it just feels like they're seeing me, but I don't think they're seeing me. I think they're seeing the rod tip of the line.
I think they're seeing movement.
You can try.
And what I say to myself, Bill, all the time is, well, you can't catch them all. Yeah. And that, I'll be back another day and we'll play chess again,
Well, I'll leave you with all of you, with our audience, for one recommendation. We've been talking about techniques, and just something I started reading, and I'm still working through it. Lefty Cray had something called Lefty's Little Library on Fly Fishing. Yeah, and there's one, Volume 2, Understanding Trout Behavior, published in 1993. He got 2 English guys to contribute to this, John Goddard and Brian Clark. And they have exhaustive thought put into and information on techniques for spotting trout in the water. How you actually change your vision, train your vision, little things you can look for. There's, they've written 30 pages in specific techniques to spot trout that you can cast to. It's really interesting. So I'll add that to the techniques thing. It's very slender little volume. I found it, somewhere, probably used. It's Fly Fishing for Trout, Volume 2, Understanding Trout Behavior by John Goddard and Brian Clark. These are guys fishing chalk streams in England, but I think some of it has relevance to us too. So you carry on. I'm sorry, I have to get on to another call. This has been great. Thanks, you guys, and thanks for everybody who listened in. I learned a lot myself this evening, so thank you all.
All right, thank you for participating. Good to see you.
It's interesting talking about line. The other thing I did last year on a 360 rod that is how often I would put in just on like an 8-foot piece of 3/0 number 3 level line, and then the rest tip it. So.
Yeah, I was going to bring it up. I actually wrote a while ago, like just some random tips, and that was one of them was the long line or short line, long tippet, and I like it out in the driftless a lot, where I'm going from super shallow riffles to deeper pools.
Yeah,
because then I can fish both of those things. I can keep it all out of the water for the riffles, and they got the tippet when I need to get deeper.
Yeah.
So
and I've gone to too, as my eyes have gotten worse over the years. I played around with sighters on the end of my line, never really liked them until I went with, and now I do fish them, but I've got an orange line with a green sighter. But then I bought one of those industrial paint markers that I think Tom or Anthony, one of you two guys were the first to start using them. Boy, that has helped me tremendously. So shorter line, longer tippet, and So anyway,
All right, just to look back at my list here, we've kind of, touched on everything, different drifting techniques, pulling, lift. Well, we haven't really talked about lifting and the swinging so much. So, I know we're getting short on time. You guys may need to run, but just to kind of complete things, lifting. This is where I think the Sakasa Kabari is talked about with the pulsing the fly. People think of that Sakasa with the reverse hackle, and the pulsing is a lifting the fly and kind of dropping it and activating that hackle, which I don't think I do that a ton. Do either of you guys do that a lot?
Some. I don't fish Sakasa as much anymore, personally.
But I don't do that a ton, but I think when I'm doing the Pon Pon with the dropper, I'm kind of doing that. I'm not activating the hackle, but I do have a fly coming up and down. And though I feel like the surface fly gets most of the action, surprisingly, I will get one, get some hitting that fly that's kind of just hopping up and down underwater. So, just to be kind of complete. And then this one, though, I think the Lysing Ring lift, which is a more focused single lift, is absolutely killer. And it's from Western Angling. I don't really see anything quite like that mentioned in Tenkara. I guess some of these things could lead to that. But for those of you who don't know, a Lysing Ring lift is basically you let your fly get deeper, and as it approaches where you think the fish might be, if you're fishing, say, downstream, you stop your rod, and then the fly swings upward in front of where the fish would be to simulate, say, a hatching bug or something like that. And I use this all the time with small wet flies, and it's can be crazy effective. I've used it with large Sakasa Kabari that I have on, like a red Takayama one, red and peacock, when tiny blueing olives were hatching. And just the action itself was enough to trigger the fish, even though the fly looked nothing like what was going on. So you guys probably both use this, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
All the
only
time.
thing it doesn't work on is a past lake course. I can't buy a fish on that fly. I think I've caught one fish on that fly in 50 years, maybe. I don't know. But,
So I would definitely, if you haven't done the Lysing Ring lift, if that's not something you've heard of or you try it, you could look it up and get a little more information about it. But yeah, that's kind of the basic premise. And generally, I'm fishing this, downstream or cross-stream. You kind of need some downstream, your fly to be downstream in order to activate that lift. Although with the Tenkara rod and the light line, you can kind of do it upstream too.
Yeah.
It's
or
not
cross, depending on how wide your water is, or just a cross as it comes down. The other manipulation technique that oftentimes works well for me is the lack of movement, not dead drifting the fly or anything, but let's say I'm on wide enough water, or I have a short enough rod where I cast up and across, and it comes and it's directly across from me, and then it gets down, and I'll just stop my rod, and the fly will come up to the surface, Lysing Ring lift, but then I'll just hold the fly there for a second. I mean, it's dragging in the current.
Yeah.
And boom, I'm just amazed at how many fish come up and take it. So instead of just immediately, as soon as the fly stops, immediately casting again, just consciously don't do anything. Let the fly sit there for 2-3 seconds before you cast. And it's amazing how often the fish will take that. And I think, what are they thinking?
Yeah. And I would add to what you're saying there, we don't have a lot of time to talk about it, but like a wet fly swing where you're letting the fly swing across the current. And again, a more focused, I fish it in a much more focused way where I'm concentrating on specific spots. I'm trying to hit, and maybe I swing it, I let it drift and swing it. But like to your point, even if you say a fish did nip at it, but you didn't hook them, when it completes that swing, if you let it sit there, I found that fish will come and he'll take it again.
Yeah.
So it's definitely.
I want to apologize about the remark I made about the past lake. I don't want to get any hate mail from men or Anthony, Larson. I just don't want to. So it's a great fly. Everybody should have one in your box. Whether you fish it or not, it's up to you. But
I love it.
You like that fly, Anthony.
I love it. Yeah, I don't fish. I mean, it's almost more of a Western coachman, I guess.
Yeah,
The
the
with the
truth.
peacock body
Yeah.
instead of a chenille body, but looks about the same. My theory on the past lake is that it's more of a bait. It looks to me more like a bait fish, like that profile with that white and you know what I mean? I mean, I don't know, but it kind of reminds me of like a little fry or something.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how when I fish it, I kind of think of it that way, like I'm fishing a little streamer almost. But so I think that kind of covers it. I know it was a little bit, free flowing here, but just to kind of wrap it up, and I'll give you guys a chance to wrap it up too. And we've all kind of alluded to it. I think when we fish these techniques, we're not thinking of them always as separate techniques, but rather we're fishing a run and we cast out. And even on one cast, we may employ a bunch of these different things in one cast, as appropriate to the water that we're fishing. They're just, rather than, hey, this cast I'm doing this next cast I'm doing this. I don't think any of us think of it so much like that. I mean, that's just something to keep in mind if you're going to be doing these things. Think about how you can do them on one cast, different parts of the drift that you're doing. That's kind of all I wanted to add there. And if you guys want to add any final comments.
For me, I think, some of these techniques I don't always use. I think they're good to know if you're a Tenkara fisherman, because to me, there's no absolutes in fishing. And you may not use them all the time, but if you're in a situation and you're not, it could be the difference I alluded to earlier. It could be the difference between catching fish and not catching fish. So I think it's good to know them. And I'll practice them from time to time if things are slow, and even if not, just to keep them. So, at least I think it's good to know them. Tom?
Yeah, and I would agree. It's important to know them.
Yeah.
And they do work. And as Anthony, as you pointed out, any given cast and drift is a continuum in techniques. The very beginning may be a dead drift or a pseudo dead drift, and then you may end up, moving the fly a little bit in an undulating fashion. You may rising ring lift it at the end, or hold it in place, or drag it upstream a little bit. It just flows from one to the next and that. Everybody will find what works best for them, for their fish and their waters in any given situation. But that said, I think it's also part of the Tenkara tradition or experience to try some of these techniques.
Yeah.
And if they didn't work the first time, well, then, another time, try it again and that sort of thing. It'll make you, I think that'll make you a better fisherman all the way around. And as I said before, now we're seeing even many of the competition fishermen using induced take techniques to increase their numbers during their competitions. So, and that's because it works.
And I can even remember looking back when I used to, fish rod and reel and indicators for nymphing, at the end of the drift, you would always amaze me how many fish you would catch stopping at the end of the drift. Well, just letting them nymphs, just let them kind of swing in the current or whatever. So, yeah.
Yeah, I like to think about it like if you gave this is all pretty intuitive to someone who hasn't been indoctrinated, right? If you gave a rod to a child and said, like, make that fly look alive,
exactly.
they would do a lot of this stuff, right? So we kind of have to shake off some of our things. And to what you said, Tom, if it may not work this time, but like I've learned fishing the same water maybe 60 times last year that there's no accounting for what's going to happen one day to the next. Like I just can't, something works great one day, next day nothing. So so don't give up. And like you said, and if you're going to do this, it's nice to honor that tradition and to try these things. And it can be hard when you're coming from Western angling to trust that this stuff works, but take it from us that it can work. So, all right. Well, thank you, Tom, and thank you, Dave, and thank you, listeners. And please, like I said earlier, I like to think of Tenkara Angler as a community, including the listeners to the podcast and the people who read the blogs. Please comment below. Let us know when we're full of it, and you don't leave us at stuff, because we're not claiming to be experts. We're just trying to share what we do and get this stuff out there for you guys to mess around with. So, all right. Thank you all.
All right.